Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability. ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. I'm your host, Jim Chapman. And as I told you in yesterday's episode, I've been dropping an episode obviously every day. If you listen to Exposed, then you know we are bringing you the content. And all of that content lately has been about Sean Combs. A lot of people are enjoying this. We're getting great downloads. But I want to assure everybody that this trial is just about over. We've probably got, I think we're going to reach a verdict by next Tuesday or Wednesday, in which case there's not many days left. Now, the jury was off today in the Sean Combs trial. Tomorrow starts the closing arguments, etc., which is today, if you're listening to this right now, because I'm recording this on Wednesday. But I wouldn't have an update, obviously, because the jury was off today. So some of you are aware, you listen to my other podcast that I have called Bloody Angola. It tells the history of Louisiana's most notorious prison, which is Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. But many of you are not aware that I have that other podcast. So here's what I'm going to do for you today. I wanted to bring you something. So I'm bringing you this week's recording of Bloody Angola podcast. I hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, in the description of this video, I am linking the link so you can go listen and follow Bloody Angola. Very interesting. I tell all kinds of different stories, and this week's is fire. So if you're so inclined, go check it out. But here's this week's Bloody Angola podcast, and I will be back with you tomorrow on another update of the Diddy trial, and it looks like we're going to go back to our normal episodes of Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite very soon, probably by the end of next week. So thank you so much for listening, and here is Bloody Angola.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstream gang, or Angola 3.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I'm going to tell you what is a little-known story in the state of Louisiana outside of the area that I live in, and that is the story of the Goodyear Killer. Now, this story centers around a guy by the name of Charles Ray Spears, and not a lot is known about Charles Ray Spears prior to his incarceration in what is known as Jackson Barracks. So I need to tell you a little bit about Jackson Barracks if you're not familiar. Jackson Barracks is located in New Orleans. It was established in 1834, and it was originally a U.S. military base. Now, during the 1960s, a work release prison was established within that barracks, and that played a big role in what we are going to discuss today. Now, in the 1990s, that prison underwent renovations as part of what was known as the Jackson Barracks Prison Project. It included adding educational programs for inmates that were on work release. However, in 1993, it closed after a notable escape and a murder, and I may tell you about that in a future episode. After that event, the former prison was converted into a police training facility, and then Hurricane Katrina hit. This was in 2005, and that caused significant damage to Jackson Barracks, including the destruction of that police training facility. And today, the barracks is currently the headquarters of the Louisiana National Guard. So that's a little history on that. And we're going to go back to July 29th of 1975, when Charles Ray Spears escaped from Jackson Barracks. He was working in the work release program there, and he was serving time on a petty theft charge. 11 days after that escape, a robbery and murder at a Goodyear tire store in Hammond, Louisiana would change the course of history in several people's lives, including that of Charles Ray Spears. Now, Hammond, Louisiana, a relatively small town in 1975. However, Hammond was and still is the largest city in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana. Hammond is the home of Southeastern Louisiana University, and aside from rambunctious nature of kids, right, college kids in 1975, things like what I'm about to tell you about, they just didn't occur often in Hammond, Louisiana. So on August 8th of 1975, the Goodyear Tire and Appliance store, they were just finished wrapping up another day. The tills were being pulled, cash, etc., being placed in a money bag, all the things you do when you close for the day as a retail establishment. It was 5:30 p.m., and the staff had not even locked the front door yet when a man enters the store. Now, at the time, the store manager, John Reed, he was 47, and the assistant manager, a guy by the name of Roy Walters, who was 26, they were in the store alone at this time. The guy walks up to them, and he approaches John Reed, and he asked him about looking at radios. Remember, we're in the year 1975. Reed went ahead, sold him a radio. The man turns to leave. Then he turns back around and he asked about some cassette tapes. So before either of the managers could respond, the man pulls out a snub-nose 38 caliber revolver and he orders both of those men to the floor. Pulls out some handcuffs, and he handcuffs both of the managers' arms together. He starts going through the cash registers, starts approaching the safe, all those sorts of things. He goes back and he asks the men, "Are you going to remember me?" John Reed says what all of us would say at this point, which is no. But at this time, the assailant pulls a gun and he shoots both of these men in the back of the head. He then exits the store. So Roy Walters, he looks over and he discovers that John Reed is already dead. Now, Roy Walters at this point has a 38 caliber bullet in the back of his head, but he's still alive in what you can only describe as a miracle, although he loses his sight at this point. He can't see. He's totally blind. Now, despite this, Walters does manage to drag John Reed. Remember, they were handcuffed together across the floor to the telephone where he manages to call police. The police show up. and Reed is pronounced dead on the scene. And Walters gets rushed to Ochsner Hospital in New Orleans, and he is in critical condition. Now, despite Walters' condition, when police first arrived at the scene, he was able to provide some details regarding a description of the man. He described the man as being 6'2". He was a black male, medium build, and had what was known at the time as Afro-style hair. He was wearing a brown shirt with green pants and black shoes. And the police determined after talking to other employees that between $2,000 and $3,000 had been taken in the robbery. At this point, he gets rushed to the hospital. The police are shutting down roads. They're setting up roadblocks, forming a perimeter, trying to catch this guy. But unfortunately, no one was captured. Now, 5 days after this event in Slidell, Louisiana, which is just a half hour or so from Hammond, Louisiana, a police officer by the name of Earl Alfred, who was 31, he responds to the call of a silent alarm, which was triggered at a jewelry store called Champagne Jewelers. This is on August 13th of 1975. He arrives with the robbery still in progress. He sees the robbery suspect going out the back door. Alfred was the first officer to arrive on the scene. He gets into a struggle with the assailant, and he was shot and killed with his own service revolver. Inside of that jewelry store, Betty Graves, who was a 20-year-old store employee, she lay stabbed 22 times with a pair of scissors. So somehow she manages to crawl to Sergeant Alfred's patrol car to call for help, but she loses consciousness before being able to do so. Incidentally, she did survive. Now, witnesses reported seeing a black and white 1964 Chevy truck on that scene, but again, police do what they do, roadblocks, etc., yet the killer gets away. And at this point, this is big news. People all over South Louisiana totally freaking out, and they're thinking these robberies/murders may be related. In the case of the Hammond, Louisiana robbery, the Chamber of Commerce gets into the act. They offer $1,000 for any information leading to the capture of the suspects. They actually up that to $2,300 with collections from members for information on the Goodyear Killer. And it wasn't too long before police did manage to unconnect, if you will, these two robberies in short order, when 3 days later, after that Hammond robbery, a 26-year-old by the name of David Eugene Lewis turns himself in for the murder of that police officer. This guy turns himself in, and he was later convicted of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and armed robbery, and he was given a life sentence. Now, unfortunately, the Goodyear slayings, they would take much longer, but a big break in the case does surface when the following February of 1976, police arrested a man by the name of Larry Donahue, who was 24, after he was caught purse snatching in New Orleans. So they start questioning people in Donahue's circle, including his cousin. His name was Clay Spears. And Clay tells police that Donahue had told him that he robbed and killed a New Orleans man in Hammond, Louisiana with the help of two cousins, a guy by the name of Leroy Donahue and a guy by the name of Charles Ray Spears, which that got the attention of police because they're still looking for Charles Ray Spears, who walked off of that work release site in Jackson Barracks, and they knew that he would be desperate, likely dangerous, etc. So, armed with this information, they interrogate Clay Donahue further for another 4 hours, and he eventually cracks. And he tells them that Larry and Charles Ray Spears robbed a drug dealer of his money and his drugs, but that it was Spears that actually killed the drug dealer. So the police, they then bring this information to Larry Donahue, and he corroborates his cousin's story, complete with fingering Spears as the killer of that dealer, who incidentally was named Ernest Smith. So in short order, The NOPD, they find and they arrest Charles Ray Spears, and they charge him in the murder of Smith. But not so fast. A defense lawyer for Clay Donahue, he argues in court what is known in the legal world as, quote, the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, which states that any evidence obtained through unconstitutional means is rendered inadmissible in court. The lawyer argued to the state that Clay Donahue's information that he provided was done so due to coercion by the police. And in this case, the judge agreed, and charges against all three men were dropped because none of the information that this guy gave them could they use. But Hammond police, they had been following this, and they felt like they had a case against Spears for the Goodyear robbery / slaying, especially after a man inside jail with Spears when he was incarcerated for the Smith killing actually speaks up and says that Spears admitted that he was the Goodyear Killer. So when he was cleared of these charges for the Smith murder, Hammond police, they pick him up and he's charged with murder and attempted murder, as well as 2 counts of armed robbery in those Goodyear tire slayings. This was on March 27th of 1976. Of course, at this point, it goes to a grand jury, the evidence is presented, and he is indicted. He goes to trial. And on August 30th of 1976, the News Digest in Amite City, Louisiana, they came out with an article, and I'm going to reference that now because it really covers the trial in great detail. And it reads, Charles Ray Spears, defendant in the Goodyear murder case, was found guilty of second-degree murder, attempted second-degree murder, and 2 counts of armed robbery. Spears will be sentenced September 16th by Judge Gordon Causey. A pre-sentence investigation must be returned on or before that date. The trial began August 24th near 5 p.m. and it continued until 7:30 when Causey recessed the proceedings until 9 a.m. on August 26th. Spears stands convicted of murder by shooting Goodyear store manager John Reed as he lay on the floor of the Hammond store handcuffed to Roy Walters Jr. Spears is also convicted of attempted second-degree murder of Walters by shooting him in the head as he lay on the floor handcuffed to Reed. The 2 convictions for armed robberies stemmed from Spears taking money from the store's cash drawer, safe, and from Reed's wallet. The incidents occurred on August 8th of 1975. The state, represented by First Assistant District Attorney Joe Simpson, told the jury they would hear the story of one of the most cold-blooded and horrible murders ever committed in Tangipahoa Parish. Assistant District Attorney Billy Quinn assisted in the case. Timothy Higgins, a public defender, told the jury in his opening statement that the case was one of mistaken identity. Dumas, who was retained by the Spears family on Friday, August 20th, assisted with the defense case. The judge ordered tight security, and all those who entered the courtroom were searched. No one was allowed to enter or leave while court was in session. The security was also deemed normal by officials who explained that such practices are not unusual in cases of such a violent nature. Taking the stand for the state first was Tom Kelly Ferris, medical doctor who performed the autopsy on Reed. Under questioning by Quinn, Ferris said that he was one of the 3 pathologists on call for Jefferson Parish Coroner's Office on August 8th of 1975. Ferris said that the cause of Reed's death was the bullet which entered one side of his head and exited the other. The second state witness was Sheriff's Public Information Officer Dick Morgan, who testified the photos of the Goodyear store taken on August 8th were real and not retouched. Morgan was not allowed to describe items in the pictures, but only to comment on his position when he took the photos. The state's strongest witness was Roy Walters Jr. Next, he took the stand for questioning by Simpson. Walters said he had been at his desk working on a report all afternoon and was still at his desk when the employees left at 5:30. Only he and Reed remained, and Reed went to the back of the store to lock the back up before returning to Walters' desk. The 2 men talked of Reed's vacation to the Ozarks, which he had taken a week previous. Walters said Reed started toward the front door around 5:35. Spears then entered the store from the front and went to the opposite counter to Reed, where Reed was helping Spears select a radio which was purchased with cash. Walters said he heard Reed ask Spears his name and he heard only an unintelligible mumble which caused him to look at Spears. Walter said he looked at Spears intently from a distance of no more than 12 feet because he wanted to see if he knew him since he was in charge of store credit and felt he should know the customers. Again, Reed asked for Spears' name and the answer was again unintelligible, according to Walters. Walters said Reed wrote the name Randall on the receipt, took the cash, and turned away from Spears. Walter said he was then standing sorting mail at the counter. Walter said Spears then asked to see cassette tape recorders and Reed called him to come and examine a machine to see how it worked. Gave him the machine, and at the instant both men were holding the machine, Spears pulled a gun on them and told them not to move. Walter said Spears then gave a pair of handcuffs to Reed and told him to put them on. Reed put one cuff on himself and the other cuff was put on Walters by Spears. Spears then made the two lie down behind the counter in which the two cash drawers were. Both men were on their stomachs, side by side. Walter said Spears went to the unlocked safe and found $500 to $600 in the safe for the Saturday employee payment and walked to the back and asked what was back there. Walter said he told Spears that it was the warehouse. Spears seemed satisfied with the answer and walked to the front and then asked them where the rest of the money was, according to Walters. Walters said he was afraid because the man was holding a gun on him and he felt like if he tried to resist that he would be shot, but he said he didn't feel that Spears was going to shoot them. Instead, he felt Spears would take the money and just leave. Walters told Spears where the cash drawers were and how to get them open, and Spears took the money and asked to see both men's wallets for identification so he could get them if they tried to identify him. Walters said Reed then spoke for the first time since Spears pulled the gun. They were also Reed's last words. He told Spears he wouldn't have to worry about them identifying him because they didn't know him. Both men had their wallets in front of them on the floor between their forearms, and Spears took out the money inside Reed's wallet and tossed it in the wastebasket. Walter said Spears didn't take his wallet. As he looked down, Walter said he could hear bam, bam, and he realized he couldn't see. He said his ears started ringing, his head was spinning, and he hunted for his glasses. He said he realized Reed had been shot as well as himself when he could hear no sound from Reed. When he thought Spears had left the store, Walter said he knew he had to get to the telephone on a desk nearby, and he tried several times to reach it. He said he had to pull Reed with him because of the handcuffs, and he finally found the phone after several tries. He said he misdialed the first time and reached an operator on his second attempt. He then asked for an ambulance and the police to come to the store. After Walters used the phone to summon help, he said he heard someone enter, but he was afraid to call out for fear it was Spears returning. Then he heard the door open and he heard some people running in and someone say, "Get the cuffs off." He said he heard a voice say, "Roy, this is Lieutenant White. Can you tell me what happened?" Walter said he gave a physical description of a black male, 6'2", tall, between 170 and 180 pounds, afro, wearing green pants, a brown spotted shirt, no socks, and sandals with soles 1 to 1.5 inches thick, and that is one heck of a description. Walter said while he was still handcuffed, he had deliberately studied Spears while Spears was moving around the store so that he would be able to accurately describe him to police. Reed said he was then taken to 7th Ward and told he would be taken to Ochsner Hospital. He said he was having serious pain and that he lost consciousness on the ride to Ochsner's. Once at the hospital, Walter said he was x-rayed, taken to a waiting area, x-rayed again, and then told he would have to undergo surgery to remove the bullet which had lodged against his optic nerve and bruised it. He said he remembers talking with his wife and praying with her and their pastor. His next memory was of Saturday morning, and he still had fuzzy vision. During the week that followed, he said he spoke with Captain Charles Binder of the Sheriff's Office and worked with the Jefferson Parish Crime Lab to make a composite sketch. Walter said he went over the description of Spears every day in his mind so that he would not forget. And Walter said after he was home from the hospital that he went to New Orleans with Captain Binder and Lieutenant White from the Hammond Police Department to look at photos of black armed robbery suspects. He said he must have eventually viewed over 1,000 photos. Walter testified that he later went to the Hammond Police Department and went through more photos. He said that periodically officers would bring him stacks of photos to view. He said he eventually saw a picture of Spears in a stack brought to him. He said he was told the man would be brought to Hammond for a lineup and that the picture was an old one. Near the 1st of April on a Wednesday night, Walter said he was called after midnight by the Hammond police to come see something important. He said he was picked up and he went into the building and told he would go up an elevator, turn left, and that he would see a lineup of men marked with numbers 1 through 5. Walter said he spotted the defendant in the middle wearing the number 3. He said the men were made to show their profiles and they had to say, quote, "What is your name?" Walter said Spears' hair was different and that he had a mustache, which he didn't have at the time of the murder/robbery. Walter said he told the officers that he wanted to see Spears at a distance of 4 or 5 feet. So he did that and Spears was picked out of that lineup. Now, during Walter's testimony, the jury was shown where the bullet entered the back of Walter's head. Simpson asked Walters if the defendant was positively the man who had shot and robbed him and killed Reed, and Walter unhesitatingly said, "Yes, it is." Walters identified objects in the pictures taken by Dick Morgan and marked the photos with X's where Reed and he lay on the floor. The photos of the scene were shown to the jury as evidence and included a picture of the blood stains. Under questioning by Higgins, Walters told of his injuries, and he described the incident as serious in that I almost lost my life, and it took 5 weeks out of my life. He said that he suffered permanent damage in a small blind spot in his field of vision as a result of the shooting and that his glasses prescription had changed. He said that he recently got a new pair of glasses and was told to return a year later for another examination. Higgins then proceeded to delve into the amount of time that it took for the robbery. Walter said it took all of 5 minutes from the time the gun was pulled. Higgins proceeded to go through an elaborate enactment of each move made by the principals. He announced that it had taken a total of 8 minutes and that he felt it would have taken the defendant substantially less, not just 3 minutes less, to do all of the things that were done. Walters commented that Higgins didn't do all of the things, he just acted as though he were doing them. Higgins also introduced a composite published in the Parish Daily, which was released shortly after the incident. Walter said that was the first one made, not the second one, which was a lot more accurate. So the defense attorney here, he's showing the first composite sketch, which apparently did not look a lot like the defendant. And he's also questioning the time frame that this poor guy had come up with. And he's saying, how could you do all this in 5 minutes or less? And the guy said, well, I wasn't actually doing all of it. I was acting like I was doing all of it. Higgins then asked if Walters thought that someone could make a mistaken identity in a case such as this one. Walters said, I don't think a person could go through what I have gone through and make a mistake. When pressed further, he deemed the possibility was very remote. Higgins brought out a panel of 3 photos, and he started to ask Walters questions about them. Simpson objected to Higgins presenting these photos of people who were supposed victims of mistaken identities and who were supposedly wrongly punished. The judge sustained that objection, and he instructed the jury to disregard that portion of the proceeding. Higgins then asked Walters if he would single out one characteristic for use in making an identification, and Walters said no. That identification would have to be made with several characteristics together. So Higgins introduces a human exhibit in the person of Lionel Robinson. This man was brought from jail and seated in the front row. The man had a shaved head and was in prison clothes. Higgins then asked Walters if he recognized him, and Walters replied no. The man had been in the lineup, apparently, which Walters had viewed but he did not have a shaved head then. So the judge at this point recessed court until 9 a.m. the following day, and he, of course, tells the jury you can't talk to anyone about this. The next day, Detective Melvin Wells of the Hammond Police Department testified, and he said that Walters identified a photo of the defendant after looking at some 1,500 photos over the period of 8 months. He said the photo of Spears was shown to Walters in a group of 10 photos. At that point, Steve Radke of the Hammond Police Department, he supervised that lineup which was held, and he testified, and he said that Spears was advised of his rights. 4 black men were taken from the jail and dressed in jail uniforms, as was Spears. Spears was then allowed to pick his own number in the lineup and to decide how they were to line up. Walters was brought in. He viewed the lineup twice from the front and side views, and he then requested that the men in this lineup be made to say something. Each man said, "What is your name?" Walters then identified Spears, saying that the hair was different, but he recognized the face and the person. The defense attorney asked if the slayer of the Slidell policeman had been put in the lineup or if any attempts had been made to match his fingerprints with those taken at the Goodyear store. Sergeant Norman Davidson of the Hammond Police Department said he showed hundreds of photos to Roy Walters, including the photo of the suspect in the Slidell police slang, and that Walters passed over it. He also said that a fingerprint had been lifted and sent to the crime lab, but that it was just an overlay print and it could not be identified. Dennis Taylor, a 21-year-old black man, was the next witness. Taylor had been convicted for armed robbery, but is presently out of prison because he has been working on cases cooperating with the sheriff's office. Taylor was used as a plant at the St. Helena Parish Jail where Spears was being held. According to Taylor, Spears admitted robbing the Goodyear store and shooting Reed and Walter, saying, quote, "I shot 2 jiving motherfuckers in the head." Taylor admitted that he would pretty much do what Detective Dykes wanted him to do because Dykes kept him out of jail. Vernon Westmoreland testified that he was an automotive manager at the time and that he had locked the store after the incident. He estimated a theft of $2,000. However, an audit later set the stolen amount at $1,500. The state then rested its case after showing photos of the deceased taken at the morgue to the jury. The first witness for the defense was Willie Spears of Chicago, who was an uncle of the defendant. He said the defendant rode with him in his car from New Orleans to Chicago on August 5th, and he said the defendant rested at his home on August 6th, and that on the 7th, he took the defendant to the Busy Beaver Auto Company to try to get him a job. The owner of the company was too busy to talk to them on the 7th, so Willie said he and the defendant returned on the 8th, and the defendant was promised a job. He said the defendant went to work for the Busy Beaver on the 9th of August. However, the prosecutor suggested Willie Sam Spears took a cousin of the defendant, Curtis Spears, to Chicago on the 5th instead of the defendant. And it was the state's contention the defendant took a bus to Chicago after committing the robbery and murder on August 8th. Jamie Beaver, owner of the Busy Beaver Auto Company in Chicago, was the next witness. He said Willie Sam Spears had brought the defendant around to get him a job and that he hired him, but he could not remember the date that he met Spears. He said that it only seemed to him that Spears went to work on a Saturday. Mr. Beaver's wife, Doris Beaver, who works as a secretary for the auto company, she testified she was certain she saw the defendant twice on August 8th. She said she remembered the date particularly because she had surgery on her foot that same day, and when she returned to the office, the defendant was in the paint shop. However, no evidence was produced to show the defendant had drawn a paycheck for working on the dates of August 8th or August 9th, and no evidence was produced to prove Miss Beaver had foot surgery. The defendant, Charles Ray Spears, then took the stand in his own behalf, and Spears said that he had been convicted of burglary at Greensburg and was given 3 years probation. He violated the probation, was sent to Angola, Bloody Angola, and then on to Jackson Barracks in New Orleans. He escaped from Jackson Barracks last July 29th, along with his first cousin, Curtis Spears. He said he stayed at the home of an aunt in New Orleans until he left for Chicago with Willie Sam Spears. This was on August 5th, according to him. He said that he got a job with the Busy Beaver on August 8th and went to work on August 9th, and he said he returned to New Orleans about 2 weeks before Mardi Gras. On cross-examination, it was brought out that when Spears returned to New Orleans, he was arrested, along with Larry Donahue and Clay Spears, on February 22nd for the murder of Ernest Smith in New Orleans. And of course, I told you all about that. Clay Spears confessed to the murder and implicated the defendant in Donahue, but Clay Spears' confession was thrown out, as was the defendant's and Donahue, by the court because Clay had been interrogated by police too long and the confession had been made under duress. That murder charge had since been dropped against all three. Spears claimed his confession to the Ernest Smith murder was beaten out of him by New Orleans officers John Dillman and Fred Dentagan. Spears said he said whatever they wanted him to say because he got tired of being beaten on. Since Charles Ray Spears testified to the existence of the Smith case arrest, the state was free to question him on the statement he gave to Dillman and Dentagan in order to attack Spears' credibility as a truthful witness. Billy Quinn began to challenge Spears' truthfulness item by item. At first, Spears insisted the statement was totally untrue and the result of the beatings. Then Spears admitted that a portion of his confession referring to where he parked his car was true. He then admitted the statement was correct where he had said he had gone to Smith's to rob him of dope. He agreed further that what he told the two officers about Smith dealing in marijuana was true. When asked if he said he shot Smith through a pillow to keep him quiet about the robbery of money, Spears admitted that he had said something like that. The two officers, Dillman and Dentagan, then testified that Spears was properly advised of his rights twice, once on St. Anne Street and once in police headquarters. They both denied any beatings or coercions had been used and that Spears' treatment was made freely and voluntarily. Both said Spears went to California after escaping from Jackson Barracks. Following a dinner break, Roy Walters Jr. took the stand briefly, and Simpson asked him if the defendant was the man who had shot him. Walters again answered emphatically that it was. Higgins' cross-examination was a reaffirmation of the physical description Walters had given Spears. The state's closing statement by Simpson cited the key witness testimony about the 8 months of photo viewing, the lineup, the several identifications in open court. Simpson told the jury that the key thing was, quote, "Do you believe our witnesses or theirs?" Simpson explained Taylor's criminal history, particularly on the armed robbery charge, was reduced to aggravated burglary, quote, "to give a break to a 17-year-old boy." He said the thing with these license plates, he had simply forgotten about them, and he cited Taylor's young age. Simpson told the jury that Taylor's most significant testimony was his pinpointing the use of a Chicago alibi and of his telling of Spears confessing to the shooting of Smith by saying, quote, "I upped my pistol," which were the exact words also used in the confession given to New Orleans police. And that's big evidence right there. Simpson stated there is no documentary evidence that puts this man, the defendant, in Chicago August 5th through 8th or any date. He also cited Smith's confession again and cited where Spears said he had lost about 40 pounds within a 2-week period. He cited the description of Spears wearing thick-soled sandals during the Goodyear incident, at which Walters was forced to view Spears from his position on the floor. The defense statements appealed to the jury to believe their witnesses and accept that the matter was a case of mistaken identity. A jury of 6 women and 6 men returned the guilty verdict after being absent from the courtroom for nearly 45 minutes. Only one juror, Dion Hagan, voted for Spears' acquittal on all 4 counts. So there you have it. Spears gets sentenced to life for the murder of Reed and 20 years for the attempted murder of Walters, as well as 2 99-year sentences for the robbery of each victim, with those sentences running concurrent. So it's off to Tangipahoa Parish Prison for this guy. But hey, once an asshole, always an asshole, right? And he sues the Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Office for mistreatment and actually wins the suit. But he screws himself in the process because the judge also ruled that he be transferred out of that prison and into, you guessed it, Bloody Angola. Now, In 1996, after appealing all kinds of shit, Spears is granted a new trial due to some questions regarding testimony in his original trial. And as scary as it sounds, the judge only gave the district attorney 3 months to retry the case, or Spears would be set free. Well, this district attorney, he made it happen. Spears was retried, and eventually justice did prevail. He was again sentenced to life in prison. And it's also interesting to point out that on December 6th of 1976, the News Digest in Amite City ran another short article, and it said, headline, State sued for $1,375,000 for actions of prison escapee. The Louisiana Department of Corrections is being sued for $1,375,000 for damage incurred as a result of the Goodyear murder in Hammond on August 8th of 1975. And then it goes into what occurred during that murder, which I've already told you. It says Walters is suing the state for $520,000. And they're talking Roy Walters. $20,000 for medical expenses, $100,000 for lost earnings and impairment of earning capacity, $100,000 for mental anguish. He's suing for pain and suffering and for personal injuries. Reed's widow also sued for just a ton of money. I'm not going to read the entire article, but interesting in that I could never find a final verdict on that lawsuit. And a lot of times that will be sealed. That becomes a civil matter, not a criminal matter. And unless you do a jury trial, usually you can't find a whole lot of information on civil cases. If it's a judge deciding the whole thing, they're usually sealed. But there you have it. In the end, justice did prevail in this case. Very non-well-known case, if you will, out of the state of Louisiana. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Bloody Angola podcast. I'm about to really ramp things up on Bloody Angola, so get ready for that. So until next time, I'm Jim Chapman with Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, lead story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola 3. Die inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody
Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.